I remember the day like it was yesterday, though it's been nearly 15 years now. It was a damp, drizzly Tuesday in late October, the kind that settles into your bones and reminds you you're not as young as you once were. My name's Thomas, and back then, I was working as a regional sales manager for a mid-sized plumbing supply company in Chicago. Not the most glamorous gig, but it paid the bills and then some. My wife, Linda, and I had been married 23 years, and though things weren't always perfect, I figured we were in it for the long haul. That morning, I was running late. As usual, my boss, Stan, had called a last-minute meeting at the downtown office, and I barely had time to choke down a half-burnt piece of toast before rushing out the door. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time I got to the office, my coat soaked through and my shoes squelching with each step. Stan was waiting in the conference room, a cheap cup of coffee in one hand and a sour look on his face. "Thomas," he said, his voice a mixture of irritation and forced cheer, "I need you to head out to the Elgin branch this afternoon. They're having some issues with the new accounts manager." His tone made it clear this was more of an order than a request. I nodded, hiding my frustration. Driving out to Elgin in this weather wasn't my idea of a productive afternoon, but arguing with Stan was a waste of breath. He always got his way, so I grabbed my coat and headed back to the parking lot. As I drove, the city slipped away, the endless gray of the suburbs replacing the towering skyline. I thought about Linda, how she'd been distant lately, always on her phone, her laughter a little too forced when I asked about her day. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, we were both busy. Marriage wasn't always roses and candlelit dinners, especially after 2 decades. The Elgin office was a squat brick building, half hidden behind an overgrown hedge. I trudged inside, shaking the rain from my coat, and was greeted by a young receptionist with bright red lipstick and an even brighter smile. Her name was Jessica, and she couldn't have been more than 25. She offered me a cup of coffee and led me to the back office, where I met with the branch manager, Carl. We talked numbers for an hour, sales targets, customer complaints, the usual, but my mind kept drifting back to Jessica. She had a spark in her eyes, a kind of hungry curiosity that made me feel noticed. At my age, that's not something you take for granted. When the meeting wrapped up, she walked me back to the front desk, her perfume soft and floral, and asked if I needed help finding my way back to the city. I declined, but her lingering smile stayed with me all the way home. That night, Linda was quiet, her eyes fixed on her phone as I told her about my day. I asked her if something was wrong, but she just shook her head, said she was tired. I let it go, but there was a knot in my gut I couldn't ignore. A week later, Stan called me into his office again. He said Elgin was still underperforming, and he wanted me to take a more hands-on role. I knew what that meant: longer hours, more travel, and a lot less time at home. Part of me was relieved. Things with Linda had grown so tense. The silence at home was starting to feel like a punishment. I started spending more time in Elgin. Jessica was always there, always ready with a smile or a kind word. We'd talk in the break room about nothing in particular, movies we liked, music, the best places to eat in the city. She'd laugh at my jokes in a way Linda hadn't in years. It felt harmless enough at first. After all, I was old enough to be her father. But the line between harmless and dangerous is thinner than you think. One rainy afternoon, we were the only ones left in the office. I was working on a stack of invoices, and she brought me a cup of coffee, her fingers brushing mine as she handed it over. It was the smallest thing, but it sent a jolt through me like a live wire. She sat down across from me, her skirt riding up just a bit, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Thomas," she said softly, her eyes locked on mine, "you work too hard." I laughed, but she didn't smile. She reached across the desk, her hand resting on mine. "You deserve a little fun," she whispered. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered I had a wife at home. But in that moment, all I could think about was how lonely I'd felt for so long. We didn't do anything that night. Not really. She leaned in close enough that I could smell the vanilla of her shampoo. But she didn't kiss me. She just let her fingers linger on my wrist, her eyes holding mine until my breath caught in my throat. Then she stood and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I drove home in the rain, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. When I got back, Linda was asleep on the couch, her phone still clutched in her hand. I watched her for a long moment, her face peaceful in the flickering light of the TV. I wondered if she had her own secrets, if the distance between us was more than just long hours and stress. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was racing, replaying that moment in the office over and over. I told myself it was nothing, just a bit of harmless flirting, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found an excuse to go back to Elgin. I told myself it was work, there were always problems to fix, but really, I wanted to see her again. Jessica was waiting for me, her smile a little more knowing this time, her touch lingering a little longer. I didn't know where it was all heading, but I couldn't stop. It was like a spark had been lit inside me, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. It didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. A week later, we crossed the line. Jessica and I met for drinks at a bar near the office, innocent enough, or so I told myself. The way she looked at me over her glass of whiskey, the way her laughter wrapped around me like a warm blanket, I couldn't resist. We ended up in a cheap motel room, the rain still falling outside, our clothes discarded in a careless heap on the floor. For a while, it felt like I was 20 again, all fire and urgency. But afterward, lying there in the dark, the weight of what I'd done crashed down on me. I tried to tell myself it didn't mean anything, but the guilt was a bitter taste in my mouth. I drove home that night feeling like a stranger in my own life. Linda was waiting for me in the kitchen, her eyes tired but kind. She asked how my day was, and I lied. I told her it was just work, just another long day, but I could see in her eyes that she knew something had changed.